I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds, and Ben Walton-Heeley is back on the podcast again tonight. So we're not going to go with the standard intro that we ordinarily do. Episode 17, which we were just talking about before we got started, some 2 years ago. Ben, you first came on this podcast when you were, if I remember the story correctly, spending a fair bit of time outside 7-Eleven, buying your cheap coffees and waiting for that phone to ring, which is when you very, very first started in business. So are you still sort of lingering around 7-Eleven? Are you still drinking those cheap coffees? Where are you at in business these days?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me back, mate. Really appreciate it. Yeah, well, I would have thought I moved on from those 7-Eleven coffees, but obviously the world's changing again now, so I might be back to them. Bringing those costs back down, which I spoke about in the first podcast with you. But so Aqua Blu Plumbing, we've grown and built a larger customer basis, as we kind of discussed last time, I guess.
And just for those who haven't listened to that podcast, you're in high-end real estate maintenance, you're doing schools, you're doing, in Melbourne, of course, a lot of the towers around town, taking care of them on the maintenance and upgrade side of things. So always something going wrong, always something to be done, right?
Yes, that's right, yeah. So keeping ourselves quite diverse across a couple of different areas there, not just locking into either just real estate or just schools or that kind of thing. So keeping our wings kind of spread, but sticking to the maintenance side of things, not so much the whole new construction.
Now, we do talk quite a bit offline, and you did mention that the world has changed in the last few weeks. I think we're at about 3 weeks, are we now, in the lockdown for the coronavirus and COVID-19 period. So not that includes you, obviously, being an essential worker, but things have changed out there.
Yeah, they definitely have. It's much quicker to get from one job to the other because the roads are very quiet. But not only that, conditions have changed. We've had to adapt to a lot of new rules and all the new regulations which have come into place. Obviously, here in Melbourne, each state by state's different. Depending if you're international, you probably have your own set of rules at this point in time. But yeah, we're just learning to adapt and comply to them. I guess it's a great opportunity in terms of seeing which areas of business are classified as essential for those that are thinking of plumbing or thinking of the trade. Basically, plumbing's going to have to be serviced through this whole process, clearly, because every household needs potable drinking water, sanitary, and all those things maintained, because otherwise we have a larger outbreak of disease. So we've got a bit of responsibility, even though that we're only tradesmen. But yeah, it is our responsibility to continue to practice all those things that we've been told to put into place. So yeah, things are changing, Matt, by all means.
We should mention that we are recording this over Zoom tonight, along with probably half the country that's on this same platform tonight, but adhering to our social distancing protocols and all the rest of it, so doing the right thing there. Do you remember when this first hit, what you were thinking? I know we were talking quite a lot around that time and just how serious it was, and if I go back in my memory, I'd heard about it, COVID-19 we're talking about now, of course. I'd heard that there were some issues in China, that things were not great there. And then as it started to move beyond the country of China and started to affect places like Australia, I think the first time that for me personally I thought that this was something that could really become something that we would have to deal with was right around the Melbourne Grand Prix. I think we were actually talking that morning when they were in a couple of hour period. There was it was on again, it was off again, it was back on, it was back off, and the long and the short of it is it never actually went ahead. So is that about the time that you thought, this might be something that really does affect us all?
Yeah, by all means. That was probably the turning point. To obviously close quite a major event like that, which then followed into Australia, it's AFL, Aussie rules, for them to looking into cancelling games, all that kind of stuff. So you're talking large numbers of people, large crowds. As soon as that kind of rolled out and they went ahead with cancelling events, I'm probably more speaking for the smaller business side of things, it did create a bit of chaos and a bit of panic, I felt, amongst a lot of business owners. It created, in terms of the panic it created, there was a lot of phone calls going on. What do we do? Do we lace, are we going to have to lay staff off? It just created that manic situation. Fortunate enough for myself, I feel that I've surrounded myself with quite good people who managed to talk me through the process of it. And we can lead into that later, Matt, but it really shook the nation very, very quickly overnight, and everyone kind of went into their own little holes and started to kind of absorb and look after themselves. I mean, we saw that with the crazy business of toilet paper. Yeah. We're a funny society when you look at ourselves from the outside. But deep down, I guess for us, I did know that we would be called upon, being an essential service, to continue. It was just a matter of actually how we're going to adapt and how we're going to make people feel comfortable under the circumstances to continue to perform our work, I guess, was probably our key aspect leading into it. But yeah, obviously, unfortunately, those new rules that come into place, things did have to change amongst a lot of businesses.
It's quite interesting, wasn't it? Because when that situation started to unfold, well, the situation we're still in now, right? It started to unfold.
Yeah.
There was that initial, how bad can it be? Not really going to affect us. And then when, as you say, we started to have these events cancelled, it was like, you know what? Maybe there's a bit more in this, and it did go really quickly. So from that point forward, did you notice from a work point of view, did it drop off quickly? Was there a change in the way you had to go about things? Obviously, apart from the fact that you were getting to jobs rather quickly because the offices and the city shut down quick, didn't it? So those people were out of the city and easy to drive around.
Yeah, definitely did. Definitely things slowed down quite quickly, I would say. I think all businesses have a little bit of a lag behind. And what I mean by that is, in general sense, in terms of sort of plumbing, what we found was, by all means, those real estate jobs, the phone, it did definitely slow down. But you have this lag behind which allows you to get back to a lot of clients that you hadn't maybe got back to, or you had things on order which you can then follow up and get. So it actually gave us a little bit of space to breathe in order to clean up some back-end stuff, which was great. But while that was happening, as a business owner, you are sitting there going, okay, this is great. I can keep everyone busy for next week. But after that week, if the phone's not ringing this week, we're going to very, very quickly head into some trouble. So while that was happening, from our end in the process, we sent out a number of emails just to reassure clients that we were still operational. We also sent out information about what we were doing to prevent any form of risk of health and safety and all the measures there, just to kind of, because it is still such obviously an unknown time for everyone, just to kind of reassure people that we were continuing business in order to maintain those essential services, basically. But yeah, so it was a little bit of a brief space, and it has definitely slowed down. I would be surprised if there was any tradesman out there that said it hasn't changed at all. But that then leads into, which has kind of been nice, actually, a little bit of time to invest back in some of those clients that have been very valuable to you, instead of you getting caught up in that day-to-day rush and that day-to-day business, actually being able to spend that little bit more time on the phone and maybe making that kind of personal touch just to check that people that are around you are actually okay themselves. Because at the end of the day, we're all going through this together, and no one knows where we're all going to end up. So it's definitely untouched grounds.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? And I mean, we've already seen some businesses that have gone downhill quickly, right? And I try, when I'm talking about this stuff, to not come across as too pessimistic or negative about the whole thing. But the reality is that, I mean, outside the trade, of course, we've got restaurants and gyms and many other service-based businesses like those that are completely shut down now. But even in the trade space, and even tradesmen in the maintenance space, which are, classed as essential and can work, we both know 10, 12 people businesses that are now virtually come to a complete standstill for a number of different reasons. And it's not only that people don't want us in their houses anymore, but it's also from, some employees don't feel comfortable coming to work at the moment. There's definitely a lot more organisation to do around clients and how you interact with those people as well, right? So it's been really interesting to see just how this has played out. Like, I've come across a number of things now that I just thought, that they'll always be busy, and all of a sudden, they weren't.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of businesses, and by all means, I think it's really important we don't stress that we're having a go at any particular size business here,
course, yeah,
or anything like that, because it's actually a moment in time. So that business that might be growing from 10 to 25 staff members, they've chosen to do that this year in this moment of time. Well, no one knew this was about to attack, So their 5-year plan's been very, very disrupted overnight. I guess probably a few little things that I feel that the ones that maybe are surviving this or are continuing to be able to produce day-to-day business, in my opinion, is probably ones that are definitely low-risk businesses. What I mean by that is probably quite small overheads, haven't grown overnight, and they've been able to pare back those running costs very, very quickly, almost when this has occurred, hit a switch and bring it back to real basic fundamentals where there's not a lot of money going out the door. I mean, I've had a chat with my staff. We've got together, and this is just like something that's so basic, but, everything that goes across that counter, guys, just be cautious of it, be aware of it. If you only need a 50 mil elbow, don't buy 350 mil elbows, not in this time in our life, because, it's probably not great for the economy, but it's a survival method, because really watching those dollars, where they're being allocated to, and not having any kind of excessive expenses running over you. It seems to be the businesses at this point that are managing, I wouldn't say to be, they're definitely not growing, but managing to kind of survive out there at the moment on a day-to-day business, in my opinion.
Yeah, I heard it said maybe yesterday or the day before that the first thing you really need to do when situations like this come up is retract to a defendable position, so you actually give yourself a chance to be here, tomorrow and next week and beyond. So yeah, it definitely has been interesting. And just you reading also much larger companies I'm talking about here, publicly traded companies around the world, just how unstable some companies are from a financial standpoint. And what I really mean by that is that how much cash you keep in the bank. And obviously, we're not financial advisors or anything here, but we're not trying to give out any advice, but just talk through some of the things that we've discussed in the last few weeks, because you do need a lot of spare cash as a business. Well, the more you have, the bigger your insurance policy is against a lot of these things, right? And we're starting to see, particularly in the airline space and the travel space and that there's no doubt that those industries have been hit quick and they've been hit hard, and you can't really, I suppose, blame them for not being 100% prepared, because none of us were. But also the amount of money that they keep in terms of expenses, and it's a good question to ask ourselves, right? How much money do we have in the bank? How long can we pay all of our expenses before we start to run out of money? And some of these companies are less than a month because their burn rate is just so high. So you did touch on a great point there, that when you are small and you're flexible, that if you do start to get impacted in terms of a drop of work, then you can very quickly move to wind back those expenses and not put yourself in that position where it does really become risky really, really fast, and you don't find yourself in, financial quicksand, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I think this moment in time will probably change the way a lot of us start to do business. I mean, no one saw a pandemic coming by any means, but I think it would be irresponsible for the person at the top not to be aware of how many weeks they could run with something like this occurring. And, a multi-million-dollar business that can only run another fortnight because of cash flow reasons is, I'm not saying it's irresponsible, but it's never been on the forefront of thinking, and I think it's going to change the way that we start to do business and risk that we take on. I think you'll see a bit of a change in society in general. So I'm no expert, by the way.
Oh, no, neither of us are. We just, we chat a lot about these things and try and relate what happens sometimes in these bigger companies to our own situations and positions and try and figure it out. Is there anything that you do differently, say 6 months ago, knowing that something like this could happen? And not to say that you could ever understand how big it's going to be, but a disaster of like a global financial crisis would be another example, but something that was going to put a significant halt on your business, now being caught in the midst of, you could say, the biggest disruption probably in the last, what are people saying, 100 years. Would you do anything different knowing that could now happen, that's a possibility?
Oh, if you knew it was coming, by all means. In terms of what I would do different, I'm not sure. Would I change? I'd probably change my own personal goals and my own personal ambitions, because once again, it was kind of that moment in time thing I was talking about before. Every business owner goes through it. Do I go for it now? Do I hold back? Do we put more staff on? Do we, do the office? There's always that growth and always those thoughts running through your mind. If you could have obviously foreseen this coming, you would have held back from a lot of those things. And I think that those business owners that have maybe taken on those things, I think that they're the ones that probably need supporting at the moment, because this was out of their control. That wasn't a silly choice. It wasn't something anyone saw coming. So I think in many respects, they're the ones that are probably hurting the most at the moment, and it's not on their back. It was just a moment in time which they chose to take on a higher risk. We all take risk on. So I think it was a bit unfortunate for a few of them that took that risk on leading into this.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a bit of a reset, certainly in terms of how much risk we're comfortable taking. I think that might be dialed back quite a lot. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and we'd all like to be able to predict the future, which of course we can't. But I really do think that we're going to approach some of these growth things a lot differently going forward, because we can all get caught up in the Facebook and Google and Uber and all this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that leads through not just from the business owner. I mean, I think your employees are probably, the staff around you that support you. I think it's a really great time as a leader to stand up and show that you're happy to support them through this period. And I think that's going to lead through to a shift in society in terms of the value of a job. I mean, we're seeing, obviously, the rate of the unemployment going up day to day. So I do feel that there's actually going to be, not to say that Australian culture is lazy by any means, but I do think that we may lead into changing our values, maybe value our jobs a little bit more, value our family time that we get. We've had numerous discussions about that. I know that, but I think we'll start to actually mould ourselves a little bit different after the situation, instead of just chasing, what do we call it, the Joneses next door and keeping up with everyone is what we say, I think, in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, keeping up with the Joneses. Exactly. And we are finding a few better ways in a lot of ways, I guess, of actually doing things, right? I mean, we had our first birthday party the other night, which we did via Zoom. And it's really interesting because I've done a lot of meetings over Zoom now and a few podcasts, and that I'd also record via Zoom as well. But in a more social sense, like if you think you go out sometimes, you can go to a family function or a birthday party or whatever, and not because you don't want to talk to anybody or to certain people, but you don't always get around to everybody. You don't always have like a meaningful conversation. But what happens when there's 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 little boxes on the screen that we're both staring at right now? When your face is there, only one person can talk at a time. You think about what you're going to say, and the time really becomes a lot more valuable. And that's been really kind of interesting to see how that's playing out, because, you know, in the past we take a whole night to go out and do all these things, and now over Zoom, and I'm not saying that we should always do it this way, but certainly it's interesting because you feel like you get a lot more done with a lot more people in like 45 minutes.
Yeah, and you do a lot more listening, I feel like, as well.
Yeah.
You engage when there's not a million people talking, as you just said. You engage, and that conversation, I think, may become a little bit more meaningful at times. Because I will say, I think this is a great time as well. I did mention it earlier, just in regards to your customers. Just check in how they're doing on a personal level as well. I think it's a time where, and you'll get some really positive feedback from that, because it's actually a great opportunity, not business-wise by any means, but to build a better relationship, because you've got two people that are probably unsecure at the moment. They've got feelings they've never felt before. We've all got stresses that we haven't had before. And it's actually, instead of like butting heads against each other, let's just turn around and have a conversation and check in on those problems that we're both facing, you know.
And don't you find yourself in some interesting conversations with some really interesting people at times, right? Because we do operate in a really personal space in other people's homes, right? So when you go in there and people are relaxed and they begin to open up, you can really get, you know, have a really meaningful conversation and a really constructive conversation about their fears and ambitions and what might be going on. And I know that we've both formed good relationships with the clients that we've had over time, you know, and some pretty high-functioning people.
I'll always say some of our friends, you know, or, you know, friends and good clients, it all started off because you probably got your bum crack out and you're underneath their kitchen sink fixing something, you know, right. and you've engaged with a really great conversation, and then suddenly you're standing at their front door and they don't let you out for another 30 minutes, but you've both really got something out of it. So I think it is a time as well, by all means, complying with all the rules that have been put into place, but to take that opportunity to, really just check in on, you know, the plumbing's one side of things, but just check in on the human side of things as well.
Absolutely. It's a good opportunity, right? We need to be pulled apart to appreciate the connection. So it's kind of interesting how that does play out. So we've both put a fair bit of time and effort into making sure that we can talk to everybody who we think is in the know in terms of where we might be heading with this situation. And we're 3 weeks in, as we said before, of lockdown now. The Prime Minister, I just wrote down earlier today, announced that we're probably looking at another 4 weeks of this. So where do you think we're going in terms of a society, an economy? How do you see the next few months playing out? Have you got any theories or ideas on that?
Oh, look, I think we're all experts, aren't we? We all know how it's all going to pan out. But look, we can only take on the guidance that we're getting, obviously, from the government, the World Health Organisation and everyone else. Currently here in Australia, I think we're at 6,500 people at the moment that have been infected. I think that we are very low across the board, but I feel that the fear is everyone knows that it is only going to take one outbreak that's going to change all of this. So if we don't continue to practice what we're doing, we're obviously going to run that at a very, very high risk out on the field. I think people will become a little bit more complacent and will become a little bit more normal for everyone to spend their day-to-day in their four walls. In terms of us for plumbing, I think that what that creates is, you're going to get two sides of this. So you're going to get the first thing is people are going to break things more because they're in their house. Things are getting higher use, so if they feel comfortable with the contractor coming in, they're going to obviously be a little bit more flexible because they are home. So where you've just had in the past the client saying, I need this done, but I can only have someone at the property between 5 and 7, and you think, oh God, my wife wants me home by 4:30 tonight with the kids or whatever it may be. Can I squeeze it in on the way home? Now you're finding you're picking up the phone. They're saying, you can come around whatever time you want any day of the week. I'm at home. I think then what you get from people walking into their home is a little bit of a shift in the discussion we just had in terms of people a little bit more open to having a chat because they're a little bit more lonely. They're not engaging with people on a day-to-day business, human to human. So when someone does come in, they naturally kind of try and absorb you, which I think so. I think the job itself, I mean, the plumbing's the same, but I think the way we're dealing with people is probably a little bit different. Now, you got to remember we're talking from maintenance, so that's not large construction sites by any means. This is just one sector of plumbing. But yeah, the human-to-human contact is definitely changing by all means. People are kind of valuing you when they come into your house, and we're complying. On the other side of things, we've also got people that will leave a note and a card and a key at the front door, and they'll just sit in the other room while we perform our work and then sanitise before we leave. So you've also got that other side of people that have got a lot of fear about catching it. For whatever reason, they might be unhealthy already, or they may be subjected to getting colds a lot easier than others, weaker immune systems and that kind of thing. So I think we as a business have to adapt case-by-case situation. It's not a matter anymore of just knocking on someone's door and barging in and getting the job done and barging straight out. Understanding of reading the situation and adding that human touch where we both feel comfortable to perform the work because our safety's on the line as well. So we need to make sure that we feel safe inside their properties. So I think that it has changed. So there's a feel of movement in a month's time. It's very unknown. We'll stick to the day-to-day business and continue to listen to the guidelines that are put out.
And you're right, we're all experts, right? And most of the theories that we come up with are really based on not much more than a plumbing manual. So take all of this with a grain of salt, of course.
Definitely.
Where do you see the overall economy moving from here? And I know this is a question that, again, neither of us are anywhere near close to qualified in answering it, but we are, on the other hand, in the streets. We're feeling the pulse, the cadence of what's going on out there in society. Some people are still not too worried. Some people are really scared now. So do you have any idea or any thoughts about where we go from here, from an overall economic point of view? How long are we going to be dealing with this?
I personally think it's a point in time that's going to change. I think we'll see this year out with it still being the general day-to-day conversation which you're going to engage with someone about until there's an anti-vaccine that comes out to sort it out. I personally don't think I can see it changing this year. I think we're just going to have to learn to adapt with each other in the process. In terms of plumbing, I think in terms of maintenance, I do think it's going to continue. And I do get a little bit concerned that once we do get through this, there is going to be a high volume or a large amount of work that needs to be done that people have held off in the process. For example, me and you both know of a box gutter. If a box gutter is leaking, currently as people stand at the moment, they're probably just going to paint it or put bitumen on it in order to give it another 6 months of life instead of replacing it. So we are definitely going to, at some point, once we get through this, walk into probably an influx of work because a lot of patchwork's been done, a lot of work just to get things across the line, or also a lot of things where people just probably want it done at a cheaper rate because there's unsure times ahead.
Yeah, well, we're keeping our dollars close at the moment, like as a society, right? So we've kind of come up with a couple of, I've come up with them and shared them with you, and you verified them.
And I've told everyone about them.
Yeah, that's right. So that's probably a good indication of exactly how true they may turn out to be. But anyway, so let's discuss both of them. First of all, I come up with the 50% rule, and I think that's the day that every business is going to have when they realise that they've lost 50% of their turnover of their work. And we've seen that in some industries who have lost 100% already. So that's certainly going to be an average across sort of everything. Of course, there are booming industries, of course, as well. But the reason that I think it's important to consider questions like this is because what happens if it does happen? You know, you want to be thinking about these contingency plans now and what you would actually do. And as you said before, you've got to dial back your expenses and you've got to act quickly and you've got to move into a pretty strong leadership place for your team again really quickly. But you also want to think about what your business might look like if you do have that big drop. And we're seeing things, and a lot of this is outside the control of any industry, right? I mean, the government says close restaurants. If you own a restaurant, then you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen a lot of heartache in the real estate sector just in the last couple of weeks as these restaurants that rent buildings who now can't pay their rent. That flows on to the next industry. So it's going to be, I think, pretty unlikely that you're not going to be touched by this in some way. You know, if it's not business, it might be health, right? So the 50% rule is the first one that we sort of came up with, that I came up with. I'll put my name to it so people know who to come after if it's incorrect. But yeah, I think it's just a good way to think about your day-to-day operation and a good way to sort of start thinking about those contingency plans and that as well, because timing is so critical with all of this stuff, right? And as the things are changing daily, it's going to affect different people in different ways. And we saw very early on that some of the maintenance companies almost went completely overnight. And then a lot of the construction guys were kind of like, well, you know, we've got still 8 floors to go and there's plenty on and, you know, it's all rolling along. And then 2 weeks later, 30% of the staff are gone. You know, just because those companies are starting to wind back, we're not quite sure what's happening. So the construction sector, you can see, is not going to be hit straight away because, you know, projects are out of the ground. But going forward, you know, 9 months from now, then that's when they're probably going to feel the pinch. And I think you really want to be aware that that could happen. And certainly you're not going to lose a hell of a lot if you actually think and make plans to operate in case that does happen. That'd be a fair call.
No, by all means. I mean, as you just said, so we're seeing businesses almost disappear overnight. Now, on the other hand, you can have a phone call with another plumber, and the attitude is, "Oh no, nothing's changed. We're running flat stick." Now, I think it leads back to that point you just said that no one's going to go untouched. It's just a matter of when it affects that particular business. Construction, in my opinion, is probably one of the last to probably be hit because you're also, as you said, projects are out of the ground, but projects probably aren't getting over the line now to begin. And the projects that are out of the ground, it relies on a global chain of suppliers which come into the country and supplies and products. Now, in saying that, what's going on in Australia right now, we feel we can't control it and we're controlling it, let alone what's going on over in Europe and America and China, where a lot of these supplies come from. Well, suddenly now we could be waiting a lot longer because different countries are being affected differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that just leads into that comment that everyone will be affected. It's just a matter of what point down that chain you do. And then what you've really got to think about that 50% and what you have in place when that 50% is gone and how you're going to, if you choose to go through this period, how you're going to deal with it and pare it back to continue to get through the hard time.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And then the second part of this rule that I've made up is the 30% rule, which in my mind says that once we get through this period, we're going to have to be 30% more efficient in the way that we go about things. We're going to have to be 30% better with our budgeting, with our planning, with how effective, how efficient we are, because I really feel that the analogy that I've used is that we're only in a pandemic, right, or something that we don't know how to deal with because we're not prepared for it. So it rains tomorrow, none of us worry too much about it, do we? Because we've built the roof over our head. All we do is walk inside and we know we're going to be fine. We're trying to figure that out at the moment. So I feel that we have got a little bit ahead of ourselves in terms of maybe not running, I'm talking sort of macro here, but not running as efficient as what we could, not being as diligent as what we probably should be. And I think that the sort of the bottom 30% of performers are probably going to get wiped out. I think the top 30% are probably going to really kick on. And then that sort of 30% is going to be sliced and diced different ways across different sectors. But I suppose the key point there is that you need to be a lot smarter and a lot more intelligent in the way that you work on the other side of COVID-19. To flourish at least anyway, and to really kick into growth mode again.
Yeah, definitely. By all means, it's a make or break moment, and that 30% to come out to rise is, I think that leads back into the start of our conversation, look at things differently and put things into place in order to create it to be a more efficient business, because that's the only way it will continue to survive in that climate.
Yeah, for sure. And again, the key there is the thinking behind those numbers too, whether it's half that amount or twice that amount or none of that amount. You still want to be thinking along those lines, just so if anything like that does happen, then you're going to be in a much better place to perhaps deal with it and turn it into an opportunity rather than being caught up with, as a lot of people are.
Yeah, most definitely.
So you personally yourself, I know that you're still rolling along pretty well at the moment, considering.
Yeah. So, definitely. We had that week of panic amongst everyone when some of those new regulations come into place, and we had a huge decline in terms of jobs, if you just want to put it in simple terms. It started to pick back up. Basically, look, we're very fortunate because, I, as you kind of mentioned, we do towers, we do schools, we do real estate. I've always thought I've spread my wings too far and crossed probably too many different areas of maintenance, but actually that's probably been my saviour in this point, because I haven't relied on one particular section of one particular industry to keep us afloat. I've found that's probably been my key to be able to tick along. When real estate slows down, we can pick up schools. When schools' budgets slow down, we can move to towers. That's probably something that I've actually come out of this and never been, I'm probably more grateful for it now than ever. It wasn't probably intentional. I was just going about my day-to-day business and answering that phone and getting those jobs done, but it's actually been probably our saviour to keep everyone ticking along in this process, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the great things that we do have here in this country that can, I suppose, in a lot of aspects, trump the financial and maybe economic logic is the great Australian spirit, right? Where we go with the old "she'll be right" and we get on with it. And just the fact that we're so far from, well, we're an island, right? We're so far from everywhere. We know that when we get on a plane to try and visit them, it takes a long time to get there. But look, we're so far from everyone, and we do have a pretty good attitude when it comes to getting over these things. So particularly in the trade space, which is the quintessential Aussie, aren't we really? So to kickstart this thing again and get going on the other side, I really do think that, there's green pastures ahead. We've just got to find our way through this little bit of a period, and then we'll, with a bit of smarts and some intelligence, we'll move on to better things.
Yes, by all means. And I think that I think everyone I might be thinking a bit highly of this, but I think we'll all come out with different values, but for the right values. And everyone's going to not be pulled back into line, but by all means, everyone's going to be maybe withdrawn back, and that's going to give a great opportunity for a lot of leaders to step up and to put a lot of good people in place within their businesses, because people will start to really kind of strive to do their best and be grateful for the opportunities that are presented in front of them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mate, is there anything you want to add before we wrap this up?
I'll add my last closing comment. For those that don't follow Matt Reynolds on Instagram, I thought that you put up a wonderful Instagram the other day, just highlighting to the young kids to look out there and look around and see those essential. Who is essential? I think the lines were who.
I wondered where you were going with that for a second.
Yeah. Sorry, mate. I could see that in your face. So you post about in reflection of who is, look around, who is an essential worker. Now, growing up as a kid, a plumber might not look that attractive, but it's a really essential part of society. It does hold quite a lot of responsibility amongst people, and have a look around, who's still kind of going strong, who will continue to go strong, and maybe just have a think about what direction you really want to go in, because you never know what path lies ahead for humanity, I guess.
That's exactly right. And we should also mention a big thanks to doctors, to nurses, to all those people right on the front lines who have got it. I mean, sometimes, we're essential workers. We are, on the ground in people's houses, but really on the front lines, that's a whole new level of commitment and risk and expertise that you really need. And I think definitely that the likes of particular doctors, nurses, and now as we're starting to homeschool our children, teachers are becoming more appreciated for the job that they do. And we're having a bit of a reset, aren't we? It was maybe, as you said, who and what we value.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because we kind of looked at a lot of, I'm not saying you look down upon plumbers or anything like that, but I think we really have hit that reset button where we all know a nurse, we all know a doctor, and have really become quite grateful for the service that they provide and the risk that they take. I think it's really kind of probably reset a lot of people's opinions, put it that way, on jobs.
And maybe, learn to be grateful for the things that we have along the way, because very easy to lose track from time to time, right? Maybe just how good we do have it here in Australia.
Stop and smell the roses.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
But thank you once again, Matt, for having me on the podcast. And I wish you all the best moving forward with it.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.